Welcome back to the SEN WA studio out here at Optus Stadium. Well, we've got a special treat for you now. Thanks to Macca's, and Macca's new Tennessee barbecue range is now touring for a limited time. Joe Brierty is the Fremantle Dockers Executive General Manager of Footy, and Joe has been good enough to join us in the studio ahead of Fremantle's game against Collingwood tomorrow night, and of course in the aftermath of what happened against St Kilda at Marvel Stadium last Friday night. Joe, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Duff. Good to be in here.
Mate, let's start with the bad stuff. What did happen against St Kilda at Marvel? What's the post-mortem told you?
Yeah, look, an unacceptable performance. So we went into the game having a really clear plan and understanding how St Kilda wanted to play. And look, our work in the contest, our work at stoppage around the ground and our ability to probably deal with their pressure throughout the game wasn't up to standard. And ultimately, it was an unacceptable performance. And I guess the frustrating thing when you look at that game for our members and fans as much as our football club internally is we're striving to bridge that gap between our consistency and our best and worst games. And you go from a game like Adelaide and the things that we can get right, and I'll talk about obviously our team defence and our contest and the things that we believe are our DNA. And then you go to a game against St Kilda and we go away from that. And that's been really the hard one to put our finger on with our playing group and understanding the standards that we're willing to accept and look at all the different aspects throughout the week. But footy's an amazing thing. You come around this week, and we've got a short turnaround and obviously going into Collingwood tomorrow night, which is going to be a big game.
How has it been addressed?
Yeah, it was pretty pointed review on Saturday. With a short turnaround, we actually would normally have probably 48 hours before we'd have a review, but actually got it done straight away on Saturday in Melbourne. And really, I said, looking at our key focuses, we went into the game with, talk about St Kilda's ability to win the ground ball and spread from stoppage and work for each other and see out runners, and got our players to jump into small groups and look through some of this vision that we can't accept and have those conversations and understand why there is that gap between the Adelaide performance and the St Kilda performance and really what we wanted to value. Went away from valuing what the team needs and ultimately got caught up in a game that was focused as individuals. And when you play a team that's coached by Ross Lyon, it's an 18-man system. And when we're playing our best footy, it's the same. So for us, that was a key conversation and some really pointed conversations between the players, but also the coaching staff. I think as a club, and JL alluded to it, we all take ownership and look at what our responsibilities were during the week in preparing for those games and even looking at what we're doing from a travel perspective, because obviously our form at home and our form away, there's a big gap.
So this is weird, isn't it? You're in a weird space. So you're 4-4. You've won 4 of your last 6. And last year, you really had a pretty exceptional record on the road. And yet, there's questions over whether you can play away from home. There's questions as to whether you're relevant. And there's questions about Justin's future, all off the back of what was an absolute stinker of a performance. Do you think there is still trust in each other between the coach and the players and the coach, when there is this sudden inconsistency in your performance?
Oh, 100%. I think that our playing group is really connected and clear on what needs to be executed. And as we spoke about, Duff, it's clear in that we're seeing these really strong performances against some quality teams within the competition. And what we need to do is find that consistency. If you can perform against the best teams in the competition, you should be able to perform week in, week out. And that comes with a level of maturity. And for us, that's the thing that we're chasing. When you talk about trust between the coaching group and the playing group, the ability to have really honest conversations, the ability to take ownership for each individual is the first thing you look to. And the way we respond 24 hours after the game and the ability to respond after other performances that haven't been up to scratch shows you that there's a strong connection and understanding and trust in when we play our DNA and the way we want to play. We're a quality football side, but what we need to find is that maturity when we're under pressure, or when we go into games away from home and we feel like we're losing momentum. How do we bring that back? And how do we find that ability to shift those games and get back to what we need to focus on, rather than ultimately finding ourselves in a position where we're chasing the opposition?
Do you think Justin is hard enough on the players, or your coaching group generally is hard enough on the players? Some of the players look to be comfortable with their spot in the AFL?
It's something we've reflected on as a football program. I don't think that's solely on Justin as well. We look at it from a performance perspective in preparation going into the week, and those conversations are being had on an individual basis and as a playing group. And I think in the most recent weeks we're seeing an ability for the playing group to have really open conversations, probably more as a group, and that's an area we really need to grow. I talked about standards and accountability, and the standards you walk past are the standards you accept. And I think as a playing group and a football program, our ability to make sure that we're consistent in that aspect as well. Talked about being comfortable. Is there an element when you go after the Adelaide game and leading into St Kilda where we feel like it's clear, and do you have a hard enough edge? And that's something that we continue to make sure we're making that front of mind. And as I alluded to, there's a maturity with that. There's a maturity with who you're willing to listen to. Do you listen to the external? Do you listen to the media? Do you listen to your family? Or do you listen to what you value in terms of understanding, as I said, what the team needs? And that's a balance. And we need to make sure that we're being more consistent in our contribution to what the team needs, week in, week out, in a competition where we're seeing teams beaten on any given day when you're off by 5%. And that's the thing that is really important from my perspective. We're chasing this 5% that is driven by a team-based, unrelenting focus on really making sure that your role is what you need to do in that moment. And we were inconsistent in our application of that last weekend and had really clear conversations. But yeah, to answer your question, there is a lot of trust in Justin and our coaching group, and really driven to have a strong performance tomorrow night.
The key here is improvement, isn't it? The objective data says you haven't clearly improved since you played finals in 2022. And when I talk about objective data, I'm saying wins, loss, that sort of thing, and then your form so far this year. Do you think that the group has improved both individually and collectively since the end of 2022 and that finals appearance?
Well, I think that when you talk about data, when you go to before the last 4 rounds of last year, we were sitting third on the ladder, and you would say 100%. And our ability to play against some teams we're contending at the back end of the year and actually finish off in key moments in those games and get a couple of wins for us to be playing finals was on a knife's edge. And you could say, look, we've seen growth in 2024 into 2025. And what we're seeing is we need to have an experience across the field that when we lose certain players at different times, we can actually control those moments and execute at the back end of last year. And that was a real focus for us going into this year. And now this year, I think from our point of view, again, when you talk to the data, as I've alluded to, when we're playing against teams where we get a clear contribution across the ground, our performances have been really strong. We've got some real strong outliers in the data that when you look at the Geelong game and you also look at the St Kilda game. Outside of that, we've seen some real growth in aspects of the game. We want to get better. But again, we've fallen away in our stoppage and clearance work. And in this game, when you lose field position, you can't lock the ball away in your forward half. It impacts your ability to score. And we've talked a fair bit about our DNA coming back to our team defence and our contests. And we need to get back to that. And it's a frustrating thing for all of our playing group, but we know what we need to prioritise. And as I said, it needs to be consistent, unrelenting its application.
Are you too reliant on Andrew Brayshaw and Caleb Sarong around the midfield? Adam Simpson on Simo and Goss for Breakfast often says, don't be exceptional at one thing, be good at everything. So you have this ability to change modes and that sort of thing. Are you too reliant on two players, and once those two players were stopped, you had nothing in your midfield?
Yeah, I think our flexibility in bringing players and the changing personnel within there plays a part in that in recent weeks. And look, obviously Nat Fyfe hasn't been available this year, and he actually played a really important role for us in terms of his leadership in our midfield and setting that and being a bigger body. I think also when you look at now Youngie coming in and out of the team, and Nathan O'Driscoll's been through there at times, and Matt Johnson. So our continuity in that space hasn't been there, and I think that plays an important part that we need to be clear on. And also there needs to be an element of, I think you're alluding to the fact we can't be reliant on two individuals and need to have more strings to our bow going through that period, but through that part of the ground. But I think that what we need to do is get some continuity as well. Sean Darcy's coming back now from obviously a fair bit of time out. So we're chasing that continuity with that group. I think when you look at two of the week prior, we were talking about these two players being the best two midfielders in the competition. And then we move to a week later where the dialogue shifts to, well, hang on, are they too reliant on those two players? So we need to have a balance in how we approach week to week as an industry and as a club internally. Our focus needs to get back to that system and continuity in that space.
Why not get another big-bodied midfielder or two in there? So we've spoken a few times about Neil Erasmus. Will Broaddy is another one that seems to be too far back in the pecking order to get a look when he was a very viable AFL player in 2022. What can you tell us about those two and where they sit in the selection pecking order?
Yeah, we'll formalise our team this afternoon. Those conversations have been had about what that makeup looks like within our midfield for sure. Look, there's opportunities there with Neil and Will. There's opportunities in terms of Bolton spent time through there and Luke Jackson as well as a bigger body. So the makeup and what we need is going to be dependent on, obviously, when you look at the Collingwood and their strengths in that space as well. So all those conversations are being had. We've had a number of conversations about Neil and Will Broaddy, and look, it's been clear to both those players on aspects of their game that they're continuing to work on, that they need to be consistent in holding up at AFL level. But, we'll get through that this afternoon and formalise what our makeup looks like and really trying to, as I said, find some consistency.
Hayden Young is a massive blow, isn't he? We're talking 10 to 12 weeks by the sounds of it, 10 weeks minimum. How confident are you that we will see Hayden Young back out there and playing this year?
Yeah, he had surgery yesterday, so confident he'll be back in that time frame of 10 to 12 weeks. It's really frustrating. It was a high risk injury in terms of its location around the T-junction in the hamstring. So unfortunate for Hayden that obviously the mechanism has resulted in a rupture, and the surgery went really well, and confident we'll see in the back end of the year. But I think you alluded to, it opens up an opportunity. We need to see some growth in those players and taking those opportunities with both hands. And we'll have some players coming back in the next 4 to 5 weeks. But this block leading up to the bye is really important to us, and looking forward to seeing some of those players come in and take that chance.
Will there be changes based on form? Obviously, Hayden's an enforced change. Will players pay the price for poor performance and be dropped after the St Kilda game?
Yeah, again, I'm not going to talk about what's happening, obviously selection at this point in time until it comes out later today. And it's something that we want to do and have an integrity at selection. But also, we've talked about it. We also had the same pretty much 23, apart from the change from Jackson and McDonald, have a really strong performance against Adelaide. So they're all parts and factors that we'll obviously deal with in coming up with the final 23.
Could you bring Pat Voss back? Not saying you will or won't, preempting that, but is it viable to bring Pat Voss back off a 3-week suspension? Because he was quite an important member of that team when he was playing.
Yeah, definitely viable. Obviously, it would, when you look at the potential for what Jackson's role might look like within the team, or even Jai Miss getting up the ground. But we'll look to lock away again what we think the best structure is in terms of what Collingwood will bring, and they've obviously alluded to some changes already. But we love the intensity. He's a trademark team-based player, and I think we've alluded to obviously that being a real focus for us coming into this weekend's game. We know the emotion that he shows around his teammates and how much he's valued. So Vossi's definitely in the calculations.
Alex Pearce gave an interview with Hamish McLaughlin during the week. Well, whether the interview was done during the week was aired during the week. He talked a lot about his anxiety. I wondered about how that, as a leader, would affect other members of the team. That a captain, sort of talked about doing things like looking at the ball and thinking, if I step on this, I won't have to play. And clearly this is a product of the things that Alex has been through to get back and playing. But do you need to get Alex to be more like a Darcy Moore who comes up the race at the MCG and he's hooting and hollering and basically saying, how good's this, boys? Let's get out there. Have you spoken to Alex about that, or do you just want Alex to be Alex?
Yeah, I want every player to be their authentic self. And that's what we need to do as an industry. And he's been selected by his peers as his captains for his actions. When we talk about what Alex has been through and not playing football for such a long period of time and 2 significant breaks, I think that was the conversation as he was coming back into playing football again. Yep. I think when we see Alex's actions in terms of his fierceness on the football field, and even his performance as captain last week, was probably one of the stronger players on the field for us. Every player deals with nerves and anxiety going into games. But I think that it's really important we understand that Alex within the four walls is revered by his teammates, and on the field, I think if you ask opposition in the way that Alex goes about it, we know that he's a competitor.
One more before I let you go, Joe. It was aired over East that Mitch Cleary reckons that Luke Jackson back to Melbourne is still a live possibility. Your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I can say it's not any kind of conversation internally. The growth that I've seen in Luke Jackson in the last 6 months at our club in terms of his professionalism and his application to his football, the connection that he has with his teammates, not only at the club but during the week away from the club. There's always going to be conversations around Luke in terms of our ruck makeup, and there's going to be conversations around the fact that his partner's originally from Melbourne. All I can go by is the actions and behaviours of the person in our four walls during the week. The fact that he's contracted and he's a valuable player to us, and we see him playing a big part in our future.
Joe, really appreciate you coming in. I know it's a big night for the club tomorrow night, a massive game. Hopefully you can get the win, get to 5-4 on the ledger, and get everything back and steady in the course of this season. Thanks for joining us.
No worries. Thanks, Duff.
Joe Brierty, he is the Executive General Manager of the Fremantle Football Club, coming to us today thanks to Macca's, and the new Tennessee barbecue range has arrived at Macca's, made with juicy 100% Aussie beef. Hurry, it's only touring for a limited time. We'll be back with more after the break.